Today I'm going to be replacing the floor pans and frame rails on my 1973 Datsun 240z. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, this is a 1973 Datsun 240z that I am trying to build for Sema. Sema is one of the biggest car events in the world at this point, and it's always been my dream to try to build a car for Sema, and this year I've got the opportunity to do that. In the past couple of videos, we picked this car up from Missouri, brought it back to Dallas, and I have started working on the car. I fully disassembled it, and I have had it sandblasted and epoxied so that it won't rust. This, however, did unveil a lot of issues with the car, one of them being the floor pans being rusted through. So today I'm going to be removing the old floor pans, removing the old frame rails, and replacing them with brand new ones. As you can see on the driver's side, there is rust all the way from the back that goes all the way through the floor pan, along the side of the floor pan, all the way up to the front here. So I'm going to go ahead and just replace this whole floor pan. Basically what I'm going to go ahead and do is just cut kind of along this seam here, along here, and then I'm going to drill out the spot welds and remove that excess material from there. After that, I can take this floor pan, this is the new floor pan, and drop it in and tack weld it in place, and then go through and fully weld it. This is the new frame rail from Apex Engineered, so I will be adding that after we get the floor pan in. As you can see underneath the car, you can see some more of that damage here. This is the original frame rail. It goes about halfway down the car, whereas these new frame rails, they're thicker and they go the whole length of the vehicle. This is a very common issue for Zs, and if you buy a Z at this point, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to have to do the floor pans and frame rails. Anyways, with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Kenny and I got the floor pan all the way out, so now we have a bunch of room to work with in here. One thing that we do have to do is go along here and drill out all of the pinch welds, which I've already kind of started doing here, and then we got to go along this line here and just do some nice clean edges so that we have something clean to weld to. One of the things that you can see here is this is the frame rail. You can see there's actually some rust in there, so it's kind of one of the hidden places where there is rust. We will be replacing that frame rail as well, but this is just kind of a general thing that you kind of do with all 240s or 280s whenever you get it. Okay, so Kenny and I have gone through and basically removed all of the little spot welds and gotten all the extra pieces off around the edges of where the floor pan was. As you can see right here, basically how these things attach is just a bunch of tiny little welds all the way along the perimeter. And so all you got to do is drill those out and then kind of go back with a finger sander or a disc sander and just kind of knock those all the way down. There is a special tool that you can use to drill out spot welds. I don't have one, but after doing this, I might need to go get one. Now all we have left to do is I need to go through, and there's a bunch of rust where these spot welds attached. Again, one of the reasons, even though the floor pans might look good, there's a lot of rust in between those seams. So it's worth doing this whether it is kind of a bad looking floor pan or not, because a lot of times the rust is hidden between those seams. I'm gonna go through with a disc sander and just clean up all of that rust so we have something clean to weld to. Okay, so it's been about 4 hours since we started, and this is about what we've gotten done. I've kind of cleaned up some of this area here. I've cleaned up along this edge here. I still need to do this area here. Kenny on that side has kind of cut that down to a butt weld. The main point of this is I just need to be able to put the car on frame rails rather than on these blocks, so that way we can actually start installing other pieces. I've got a full new suspension kit for this car, front and rear, that is really cool, that I'm really looking forward to installing. And that I can really only do once I can jack from frame rails. So that is why we're prioritizing doing this first, so I can jack from those frame rails, and then we can put the suspension in, we can start putting interior in, and we can start putting the engine and wiring harness in, which those are some of the most important pieces to actually be able to drive this car. So I will see you guys tomorrow when I finish cleaning up some of these welds. And we are back. It is another day, and Kenny is on his way here. But before he gets here, I need to do a little bit of cleanup. There's still a lot of rust in this area here, so I have to take the die grinder, grind all that down, make sure we have a clean surface to weld to, so let's go ahead and get to it. The previous owner of this did the passenger side floor pan, but he did all of the welds just a little bit too cold, so they didn't fully penetrate through both sides of the metal. As I grind this down, you end up with basically two very distinct pieces of metal that aren't fused at all other than just by a little bit of weld. Which means I'm gonna have to go down, grind all these down to where I can see both pieces of metal, and then we're gonna have to go re-weld the entire line in little stitches in different areas, and eventually just fully re-welding the pan. Kenny's been on that side. He is working on creating a little cutout.
What I've done is I just took a piece of paper, I put it up behind the cutout, taped it in place. I used tape to reinforce the edge, just so it's a little bit more sturdy. And then I took a Sharpie, went around the cutout. I found the points of my flange here that we obviously already cut out. Starting point, ending point, use a straight edge to create a connecting point, and then I'm just cutting that out. I'll put that on some metal, bend it to shape, get some butt weld clamps in here, and then tack it in place so we can get some nice clean metal back in here.
We're just going through all of the rusted out areas, the pitted areas, and we are replacing it with brand new metal, or at least better metal than what was there. So Kenny's working on getting that cut out, and we should be pretty dang close to getting this floor pan in. And then all we have to do is weld it, and then we can move on to the frame rails. Okay, so Kenny and I have been working on cleaning up the welds, and Kenny has actually gone through and cut out the area that has been kind of rusted through. So basically, we are ready to do kind of a test fit and CLECO the actual floor pan in. But this is kind of where we're sitting at here. This we kind of deemed savable. We had to cut this out here, and then this is kind of savable as well. So Kenny went through, did some nice clean cuts and lines, so we can go ahead and drop that in.
All right, so we went ahead and we took this paper template and transferred it to some metal. And then I took a couple other paper templates and put it up on the sides of the opening to get my profiles, the shape of the curves for each end. I took this over some round stock, hammered it, bent it in the right spots. I went ahead and marked where the start and end of the curves are, and you can see how it's kind of a conical curve, smaller here, bigger here. So that kind of helps you to figure out where you have to move the metal. Bent that up, and now it's ready to be put in place. And any spots that are a little too tight, we can tickle it with the finger sander, and then we can start tacking it in place with the welder.
One of the big reasons why I'm building this car is not just to build another Datsun, but it's actually to learn a lot of the stuff the right way from people that know what they're doing. And Kenny has done this on his Mini and on previous other projects before that as well. So I'm just really happy that I'm getting to learn some of this stuff. He showed me some really cool techniques with the hammer and dolly to kind of form that piece. And it's just kind of a cool thing that I get to learn this stuff from people that have done it before, that are good at it, and so that in the future I can actually do it myself. Anyways, with that said, let's go ahead, whip out the welder, and actually start putting some beads down, start tacking stuff in place. Kenny has been working on welding this piece in. This is kind of where we're at with it. Frankly, it looks better than it did from factory, just saying. But it looks pretty dang good. Now all we gotta do really is get the floor pan in. That's right, it's floor pan time. Okay, so Kenny has done an amazing job at getting this floor pan prepped and ready to actually get welded into the car. I've been working on the other side. Kenny has been working on this. Basically, he used a bunch of CLECOs to get this set in place. He got this line basically perfect between these two, and then these kind of butt weld clamps that hold these two pieces together. Okay, so it's been a couple of days since I've updated the camera. As you can tell, my hair's a little shorter, and there's a reason for that. Basically, we have been trying to test fit everything in the frame rails onto the bottom of the car. However, the car body isn't exactly perfect, and that's just because Datsun engineers back in the 70s weren't exactly perfect. So we've been having to kind of re-engineer the rails a little bit so they'll fit a little bit better. So we got the back pieces of the frame rail welded up, but one of the biggest issues that we had there was that since the sheet metal is so thick, it's 12 gauge, which basically means it's almost 1/8 of an inch thick. We had some issue with it fully welding to the body. So we had to turn the heat up a little bit. We had to mess around with the weld through primer, and eventually we did get those welded on. Now what we're working with is at the front of the car here, we have some of the old frame rail pieces that these new ones actually kind of weld over and we stitch weld it, but we need to make sure that they are fully seated properly and not adding any weird pivot points or tension on these new frame rails. So right now we're just kind of cleaning these up. Kenny's been working on this side over here. I'm gonna start working on this side and basically just get it to the point where we can put these new ones over these old ones. But before we do that, Kenny and I are gonna clean out the inside of this frame rail right here, spray it with some rust encapsulator so that if there is any rust in here, it stays in there and it doesn't spread over time. Yeah, that stuff. Look at that. Honestly, it doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, it's a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was enough where I was like, I want to treat this.
Yeah, okay. If you want, I can. Oh, well, that worked.
All right, so we've got both sides ground down and we're starting to fit the rails. I've got a few CLECO holes drilled already, a few of them in position. We'll get more in once we remove the helping hand stool here. Got a C-clamp up there at the head of the rail. That's keeping it in position up there because that has to be bent upward into position. Back here, I've got it lined up with the rear rail section we've already welded in. I will be doing stitch welds along these edges, plug welds along here, potentially also some stitch welds. We'll see how satisfied we are with those welds. And then up there, we're going to be doing a bunch of stitch welds along the edges of those flat sections. So we're going to be learning some good lessons on this side. So I'm going to wrap up this side, and then I'm going to turn it over to Grayson so that you can do the other side.
Yeah, again, one of the reasons why I got Kenny here, Kenny's been a huge help, so I'm gonna put his stuff down below in the description. He's got a cool little mini that he's gonna start hopefully making some content with if I can convince him. He's been a huge help teaching me some of this sheet metal stuff that I don't know. So these frame rails and floor pans are a pretty big deal when it comes to Datsuns. And since I've never done anything like this before, he's been guiding me through it and I've learned quite a bit, and I'm excited to actually get these frame rails on because that means we can actually build the rest of the car. Anyway, enough of me talking. Let's go ahead and get to welding. Okay, so underneath the car here, you can see we have the frame rail spanning the whole length of the car now. So we've got that CLECO'd in place. CLECOs I kind of just found out about and they're my new favorite thing. Basically they're little pins that will hold it in place for the test fit so we can actually do the plug welds and then go back later and fill in where the CLECOs were. So if you know anything about Datsuns, the Datsun frame rails usually only go about halfway down the car and they're kind of flimsy. That's why you kind of have to replace these frame rails, especially after 40, 50 years. These new ones are 12 gauge steel, so they're substantially thicker and they span the whole length of the bottom side of the car, so it is way more rigid and easier to jack from as well. Now all we have to go through and do is weld these plug welds in. After that, we can do some stitch welds in some certain areas, do the other side, and then we will be good to finally do the rest of this car. One of the things we have to do to fit these new frame rails is we actually have to cut away what's left of the old one. However, this one has been jacked from and it kind of mushroomed out. And so we got to cut it away a little bit so that it will actually fit over. When I actually cut it away, there is a bunch of rust inside the rail, which is not uncommon, but it does need to be dealt with. Now, since it is inside the rail, it is a little hard to get to. Basically, anything that I can't get to with the finger sander because it is a little cavity up in there, I'm going to be using this rust neutralizer that basically I will spray it in there. It'll bind to the rust and neutralize it and preventing it from spreading more. If I really wanted to be super detailed, we would grind away the whole thing, put in a totally new frame rail, but really that's just unrealistic. It would add substantially more work, and really it's not necessary when stuff like this exists that can fix it without having to do all that work. After we do that, we should be able to fit the new frame rail on this side and start welding it in. Hit my funny bone, bro. A couple hours later, and I think I finally have the frame rail at least mostly welded in with all of the spot and plug welds. On the floor pan here, we have some very nice heat marks, meaning that this stuff actually bonded all the way through the rail and then into the pan itself. Underneath the car here, you can actually see the frame rail and all of these welds. While the welds don't look really pretty right now, I haven't ground them down. Really, they're just holding it in place enough that we can actually jack from it. As you can see there is the frame rail. It runs along the full length of the car. Really, the next step is to just clean up these welds, get these ground down, and then we can spray some epoxy primer on here, make it look really nice so nothing's going to rust. Then we can set the car down and actually start building the rest of it. There's a couple of things that Kenny and I learned while doing these frame rails. These are not exactly the easiest thing to do if you've never had any experience welding. That's kind of why I have Kenny here. While I have some experience welding at Iron Horse and a little bit before that, Kenny has given me a bunch of insight into how to apply heat, certain welding techniques, a bunch of really cool stuff that I didn't really even know to think of, let alone know how to do. One of the things that Kenny and I both struggled with is that these frame rails are really thick steel. They're 12 gauge steel, which is good because they're gonna hold up really well in the long term. However, that does mean that it requires quite a bit of heat to actually get these things to fuse properly. For a lot of the sheet metal, we've been welding at like 50, 55 amps. For these, we had to crank it all the way up to 100 amps to actually get any sort of proper fusion, and even then we had a couple of the welds break. Not to mention, this has probably taken us about 4 to 5 8-hour days each putting into this car to get these things done. Now, I'll say that we are fixing some mistakes that weren't really our fault that are adding to that time, but still, it is one of the things that if you're doing this on your car, it is going to take way more time, effort, and energy than you think, especially if you're using these thicker frame rails. Also, while I'm here telling you guys about this, I want to give a huge shout out to Apex Engineered for sending me these frame rails. They have been a huge help with a bunch of the parts on this project, so go check them out down below for these specific frame rails. Along with that, any of the tools, lights, camera equipment that we use are all linked down below as well. We used a lot of tools and supplies and materials to actually do these frame rails, whether it's the belt sanders, the belts themselves, the disc sanders, the cutoff wheels, our headband lights, all of it is going to be linked down below. So if you guys do want to attempt this or just add to your tool arsenal, that'll be available for you. And it supports the channel for absolutely free, basically, other than you're just buying the product that you would buy anyway. With that subtle, not so subtle plug out of the way, thank you guys, and let's get back to work. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to go ahead and go through and prime these rails. I just don't want them rusting. I'm going to go back later and fix a lot of this stuff anyway. So I will be grinding some of this primer down, but I want to go ahead and get moving on this project. So let's go ahead and prime these rails. I'm using a 2K epoxy primer, just like we did on the whole body. This stuff's going to hold up really well. And then we'll go back with like filler primer, seam sealer on top of this and fill in some of those gaps. Before I spray though, I do want to show you guys what it looks like underneath the car and everywhere we're spraying. I figured I'd go ahead and do this door sill too, so I went ahead and prep that with a DA and a degreaser. As you can see, this area I never primed when we actually put it in, so now's kind of the time to do it. As you can see, we went all the way from the back to the front of the car with the brand new super thick frame rail. And then we did the same on the other side as well. There is that patch panel right there that I'm going to have to fix later. But overall, it's looking really good, looking all brand new. Looks good in the rear, and then the front looks good as well. Literally all I'm going to do is just spray this stuff and let it sit overnight. So pretty straightforward, but if I find anything interesting in the process, I'll let you know. Okay, so I'm out of primer, at least in that bottle, and I got both frame rails done and the door sill and some of the floor pan as well. The whole bottom side I got, top side not as much. It's a little fumy in here, so I'm gonna go and pack the heck up, get out of here, and let it cure overnight. Wow, those fumes are like... I'm out. I'll see you tomorrow. Oh. Oh. Okay, so it is the next day. We have let this cure overnight, and as you can see, these are now dry and epoxied, so we can use these quick jacks here, raise them up, and support the whole car on the quick jacks rather than these Lincoln Log block 2x4 things that we made. So that's going to allow us to put the suspension in. Let's go ahead and raise it, support it on the frame rails. These actually turned out really, really good with the epoxy, so it makes me feel pretty good, but once we raise it a little higher, I can get an even better look at it. Okay, go down. I think we're good. Bada bing, bada boom, baby. Got it down. Alright. Okay, so we have finally got the car off of the blocks. Thank God. The welds so far have not failed in the frame rails or the floor pans. So we should be good to start putting the suspension in. So that's what we're going to be doing in the next video. That's kind of how you do the floor pans and the frame rails on a Datsun. I took probably a little longer, and I'm still gonna have to go back and touch it up later, but in the next video we'll be putting in about $10,000 worth of suspension into this car. Super stoked for it. Logan's here to help me for that, so be sure to look out for that video. Subscribe if you're not already, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks, bye. Oh, never mind, hold on, bad angle.